The blue glow of the phone screen cut through the darkness of our bedroom like a lighthouse beacon, warning ships away from rocky shores. 2:17 a.m. The notification sound had become as familiar as my own heartbeat over the past few months, a soft chime that seemed to echo louder in the silence than it should have. Lydia stirred beside me, her hand reaching automatically for the device on her nightstand. Even in sleep, she was connected to that thing. I watched through half-closed eyes as she squinted at the screen, her thumb moving in quick, practiced swipes. A smile played at the corners of her mouth, the kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "Work emergency?" I whispered, though we both knew the law firm didn't send heart emojis with their urgent case files. She set the phone face down and rolled away from me. "Go back to sleep, Bennett." But sleep had abandoned me months ago, right around the time these midnight interruptions began. I lay there listening to her breathing return to its steady rhythm while my mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to consider. 23 years of marriage had taught me to recognize the subtle shifts in her behavior, the way she angled her phone away from me during dinner, how she'd started working late more frequently, the new password protection on devices that used to be as open as our joint checking account. The next morning arrived with the usual choreographed dance of avoidance. Lydia emerged from the shower already dressed in her power suit, navy blue with sharp shoulders that made her look like she was preparing for battle. In many ways, I suppose she was. The legal world had always been her battlefield, and she wore her ambition like armor. "Coffee's fresh," I offered, holding up the pot I'd just finished brewing. "No time. Meeting with the Hartwell account at 8. She grabbed her briefcase and keys in one fluid motion, the kind of efficiency that had made her one of the most successful attorneys in the city. "Don't wait up tonight. We're taking the clients to dinner." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam would have been. I stood in our kitchen, my kitchen now it seemed, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had once felt complete. The coffee grew cold in my hands as I stared at the family photos lining the windowsill. Our daughter Mara's graduation from college last spring, our anniversary dinner from 2 years ago. Images of a happiness that felt as distant as childhood memories. My phone buzzed with a text from Jazz O'Reilly, my workout partner and the closest thing I had to a best friend since Lydia's career had consumed most of our social circle. "Gym at 6? You look like you need to hit something." He wasn't wrong. The boxing gym had become my sanctuary over the past year, the only place where the constant hum of anxiety in my chest could find release through physical exertion. Jazz, a retired police detective with 30 years of experience reading people, had picked up on my marital troubles long before I'd been ready to admit them to myself. I spent the day at my office, managing the regional accounts for a mid-sized manufacturing company. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough to support Lydia's expensive tastes and our comfortable lifestyle in the suburbs. The irony wasn't lost on me that my steady, predictable income had funded the very ambitions that were now pulling her away from our marriage. By 6 o'clock, I was wrapping my hands in the familiar ritual that preceded every workout. The gym smelled of sweat and determination, a honest scent that cut through the artificial pleasantries that dominated most of my daily interactions. "You're wound tighter than a $2 watch," Jazz observed, watching me attack the heavy bag with more intensity than usual. "Want to talk about it?" I threw a combination that would have made my trainer proud, feeling the satisfying impact travel up my arms. "Lydia's having an affair." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fired gun. Jazz stopped his own workout and leaned against the ropes of the practice ring. "You sure about that, or just suspicious?" The midnight texts, the new passwords, the way she looks at her phone like it contains the secrets of the universe. I landed another solid punch, my knuckles singing with the impact. "I'm not paranoid, Jazz. I'm observant." "Observation's good. Evidence is better." He tossed me a towel as I stepped back from the bag. "What's your next move?" That was the question that had been eating at me for weeks. What was my next move? Confront her with suspicions she'd deny? Hire a private investigator like some cliché from a bad movie? Pretend everything was fine until the charade became unbearable? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to know the truth. Part of me is terrified of what I'll find. Jazz nodded with the understanding of someone who'd seen enough broken marriages during his years on the force. Truth has a way of surfacing whether we go looking for it or not. Question is whether you want to be prepared when it does. That night, Lydia came home after midnight, claiming the client dinner had run late. She smelled like expensive wine and cologne that wasn't mine. When she headed straight for the shower without so much as a goodnight kiss, I made a decision that would change everything. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, forgotten in her rush to wash away the evidence of her evening. For 23 years I'd respected her privacy, trusted her completely, never questioned her word or her loyalty. But trust, I was learning, was like a fine piece of china. Beautiful when intact, but once cracked, it could never be completely whole again. The screen lit up at my touch, revealing a lock screen I didn't recognize. The password I'd seen her use countless times, Mara's birthday, didn't work. Neither did our anniversary or any other significant date from our shared history. But muscle memory is a powerful thing, and I watched her fingers often enough during her late-night texting sessions to recognize the pattern she traced across the screen. The phone unlocked. What I found in her messages made my hand shake with something that wasn't quite anger yet, but was definitely headed in that direction. Months of conversations with someone named Reddick, a junior associate at her firm. The messages started professionally enough. Case discussions, meeting schedules, work-related banter. But they evolved into something else entirely. Missing you already, read a message from 3 hours ago. Can't stop thinking about this afternoon, came her reply. The photos were worse than the words. Images that left no doubt about the nature of their friendship. Timestamps that corresponded with her claimed work emergencies and late client meetings. I scrolled through months of evidence, each message and image another nail in the coffin of my marriage. My first instinct was to storm upstairs and confront her immediately, to throw the phone at her feet and demand explanations I already knew would be lies. But Jazz's words echoed in my mind. Evidence is better than suspicion. And if I was going to act on this information, I needed to be smart about it. I forwarded the most damning messages and photos to my own email, then created a backup account and sent copies there as well. 23 years of marriage deserved more than a midnight confrontation that would inevitably devolve into accusations and denials. The shower was still running upstairs when I finished documenting her betrayal. I placed her phone exactly where she'd left it and went to the living room to wait. When she finally came downstairs in her silk robe, hair wrapped in a towel, she looked genuinely surprised to see me still awake. "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true enough. She retrieved her phone and glanced at the screen, checking for messages she'd missed during her shower. The casual way she did it, the automatic nature of the gesture, told me everything I needed to know about how routine this deception had become. "Bennett," she said, settling into the chair across from me with the kind of careful positioning that suggested she was preparing for a difficult conversation. "We need to talk." For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest like a bird trying to escape a cage. Maybe she was going to confess. Maybe the guilt had finally become unbearable and she was ready to come clean, to fight for our marriage, to choose us over whatever temporary madness had taken hold of her. "I think we should consider counseling," she continued, and the hope died as quickly as it had been born. "You've been acting strange lately, distant, suspicious. It's not healthy, Bennett. This paranoia about my work schedule, the way you watch me when I'm on my phone, it's becoming a problem." The audacity of it took my breath away. She was having an affair, documenting it in explicit detail on her phone, and somehow I was the problem for noticing the changes in her behavior. You're being childish. Exes can be friends, she said when I mentioned Cole's name, laughing at my concerns as if they were the delusions of an insecure teenager. Cole and I worked together on several cases before he transferred to corporate. We're colleagues, Bennett. Friends. Just because you don't understand professional relationships doesn't mean there's anything inappropriate happening. Friends don't exchange photos at 2 a.m., I thought, but didn't say. Friends don't send messages about missing each other and thinking about secret afternoons. Friends don't document their betrayals in high-resolution detail and store them in digital archives that could destroy marriages and careers. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I nodded and agreed that perhaps counseling might be helpful. I played the role of the paranoid husband who needed professional help to deal with his unfounded suspicions. I let her gaslight me with the skill of someone who'd built a career on convincing juries that black was white and up was down. Because I had evidence now. And evidence, as Jazz had pointed out, was better than suspicion. The next morning, Lydia left for work with a kiss on my cheek and a promise to research marriage counselors. I watched her drive away in her BMW, probably heading to another rendezvous with Cole, and made a phone call I'd been putting off for months. Winston, it's Bennett. I need to talk to you about Lydia. It's important. Winston Hartwell was my father-in-law, though he'd never been particularly warm to the blue-collar guy who'd married his ambitious daughter. He was old money, the kind of New England aristocrat who traced his family lineage back to the Mayflower and had never let anyone forget it. His approval had always mattered to Lydia more than she cared to admit, and his opinion carried weight in circles where reputation was everything. What's this about, Bennett? His voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. It's something that needs to be discussed in person. Are you free this afternoon? There was a pause, the kind of silence that suggested he was weighing whether my request was worth his valuable time. Come to the house at 3. This better be important. The Hartwell estate sat on 15 acres of manicured perfection in the most exclusive suburb of the city. The house itself was a monument to generational wealth, Georgian colonial architecture with columns that reached toward heaven and windows that reflected the afternoon sun like accusatory eyes. I'd been here countless times over the years, but it never failed to remind me of the social chasm between Lydia's world and mine. Winston met me in his study, a room that smelled of leather and old money. The walls were lined with law books and family portraits, generations of Hartwells staring down with expressions of barely concealed superiority. He gestured to a chair across from his massive oak desk, the same chair where I'd sat 24 years ago to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait for Sunday dinner? He asked, settling into his chair with the deliberate movements of a man who'd recently turned 74. I pulled out my phone and opened the email containing the evidence I'd gathered. I need to show you something about Lydia, about the kind of person she's become. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent as I handed him the phone. I watched his face as he scrolled through the messages and photos, watched his expression change from mild curiosity to shock to something that looked like disgust. How long has this been going on? He asked finally, his voice carefully controlled. Months, based on the timestamps, maybe longer. I took the phone back and met his gaze directly. I thought you should know before I decide how to handle this. Winston was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the perfectly maintained gardens that had been his pride and joy for decades. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of profound disappointment. Lydia was raised better than this. We gave her every advantage, every opportunity to build a life of substance and integrity. He turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked old. I'm sorry, Bennett. Truly sorry. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Richard, it's Winston Hartwell. I need you to come to the house immediately. Yes, today. We need to discuss some revisions to my estate planning. The conversation was brief and professional, but I understood its significance. Richard Pemberton had been the Hartwell family attorney for 30 years, handling everything from business acquisitions to wills and trusts. If Winston was calling him for an emergency meeting, it meant Lydia's inheritance was about to undergo some dramatic changes. "She'll know it came from me," I said after he hung up. "Let her know." Winston's voice had regained its steel. "Actions have consequences, Bennett. It's time my daughter learned that lesson." I drove home with a mixture of satisfaction and dread churning in my stomach. The first domino had been pushed, and there was no stopping the cascade that would follow. By evening, Lydia would discover that her financial future had evaporated along with her father's respect. The trust fund that had been her safety net, the inheritance that had made her feel invincible, gone. The house felt different when I walked through the front door, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation of the storm to come. I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and settled into my chair to wait. Lydia would be home soon, probably fresh from another afternoon with Cole, blissfully unaware that her world was about to implode. My phone buzzed with a text from Jazz. "How'd it go with the old man?" "First shot fired," I typed back. "Now we see what happens when the smoke clears." But I already knew what would happen. Lydia would rage and blame and try to manipulate her way out of the consequences of her choices. She'd paint me as the villain for exposing her betrayal, claim I'd destroyed our family out of spite and jealousy. She'd use every weapon in her considerable arsenal to make me the enemy. The difference was, this time I was ready for the fight. Lydia's key turned in the lock at exactly 6:30, the same time she'd been arriving home for the past 3 weeks. Consistency in deception, I'd learned, was just another form of routine. She called out a cheerful, "Hello, darling," as she set down her briefcase and hung her coat in the closet with practiced efficiency. "How was your day?" I asked from the living room, bourbon warming my throat and steadying my nerves. "Productive. Very productive." She appeared in the doorway with that post-affair glow that I'd mistaken for work satisfaction until recently. "Cole and I wrapped up the Morrison contract negotiations. Should be a significant win for the firm." The casual way she dropped his name into conversation was almost impressive. No hesitation, no guilty flush, just the smooth confidence of someone who'd convinced herself that her lies were truth. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm sure your father will be proud when he hears about your success." Something in my tone must have registered because her smile faltered slightly. "Speaking of Dad, he called this afternoon. Wants to see me tomorrow evening. Something about family business." I took another sip of bourbon and watched her face carefully. "Did he say what kind of family business?" "No, but you know how he is. Probably wants to discuss the foundation's annual fundraiser or update me on some investment strategy." She moved to the bar cart and poured herself a glass of wine, her movements still graceful but somehow less certain than they'd been moments before. "Did you call him today?" The question was asked casually, but I caught the underlying tension. Lydia had always been skilled at reading people. It was part of what made her such an effective attorney. But 23 years of marriage worked both ways, and I could see the wheels turning behind her carefully composed expression. "We spoke briefly," I admitted. "Nothing important." She nodded and settled into her chair, wine glass cradled in both hands like a shield. "Bennett, about last night, about our conversation regarding counseling. I've been thinking—" My phone rang, cutting through whatever manipulation she'd been preparing to deploy. The caller ID showed Jazz's name, and I answered with relief. "Sorry to interrupt your evening." Jazz's gravelly voice filled the space between us, "but I wanted to confirm our workout tomorrow. Heard there might be some interesting developments in your situation." "Developments?" Lydia's eyebrows rose with the kind of sharp attention she usually reserved for opposing counsel. I covered the phone with my hand. "Just gym talk, sweetheart. Nothing that would interest you. Into the phone, I said, "Tomorrow at 6 should be fine. We'll have plenty to discuss by then." After I hung up, Lydia was studying me with the intensity of a prosecutor who'd spotted a weakness in a witness's testimony. "You told him about our marriage problems." It wasn't a question, and I didn't treat it like one. Jazz is a friend. Friends talk about things that matter. Our private business isn't appropriate conversation for a gym. Her voice carried the crisp authority she used in courtrooms, but there was something desperate underneath it. "What we're going through is between us, Bennett, not the entire neighborhood." "Like your friendship with Cole is between colleagues?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Lydia's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips, and for just a moment, her mask slipped enough for me to see the fear underneath. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm observing that some friendships are more private than others. Some require midnight conversations and afternoon meetings that don't appear on office calendars." She set down her wine with deliberate care, the kind of precise movement that suggested she was fighting to maintain control. "Bennett, this paranoia has to stop. I've tried to be patient, tried to understand that you're feeling insecure about my career success, but these accusations are becoming intolerable." "What accusations?" I simply commented on the nature of modern friendship, how colleagues stay connected outside traditional business hours, the dedication required to maintain professional relationships in today's competitive environment. Each word was chosen carefully, delivered with the kind of casual precision that made it clear I knew exactly what I was talking about without saying anything she could directly challenge. It was a technique I'd learned from watching her steer conversations for years, applying pressure so subtly that the target didn't realize what was happening until the damage was already done. "You're being ridiculous," she said, but the confidence was leaking out of her voice like air from a punctured tire. "Am I? Then you won't mind if I mention to your father how impressed I am by your dedication to mentoring junior associates, how you've taken Cole under your wing, so to speak, given him personal attention that goes well beyond the usual supervisor-subordinate relationship." Lydia's face went pale, and she stood up abruptly, wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of her glass. "I'm going upstairs. When you're ready to have an adult conversation instead of playing these childish games, let me know." I watched her retreat, noting the slight tremor in her hands and the way she avoided looking directly at me. The first cracks were showing in her facade, hairline fractures that would widen under pressure until the whole structure collapsed. My phone buzzed with a text message, not from Jazz this time, but from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Ashford, this is Richard Pemberton, the Hartwell family attorney. Mr. Hartwell asked me to inform you that the estate revisions have been completed and filed. The relevant parties will be notified tomorrow. Thank you for bringing this matter to his attention." I deleted the message and finished my bourbon, listening to Lydia's footsteps pacing back and forth in our bedroom above. She was probably on the phone with Cole right now, trying to figure out how much I knew and what kind of damage control might be necessary. But it was too late for damage control. The avalanche had already started, and all she could do now was try not to get buried under the debris of her own choices. The next evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel sharp and clear. I was in the garage, organizing tools that didn't need organizing, when Lydia's BMW pulled into the driveway. She'd been gone for 3 hours, ostensibly having dinner with her father to discuss whatever family business he'd wanted to address. The car door slammed with more force than necessary, and her heels clicked against the concrete with the staccato rhythm of barely controlled fury. When she appeared in the garage doorway, her face was flushed, and her carefully styled hair showed signs of distress. "You son of a—" She caught herself before finishing the sentence, but the venom in her voice made the unspoken word unnecessary. "How could you do this to me? To our family?" I set down the wrench I'd been pretending to examine and turned to face her. "Do what, exactly?" Don't play innocent with me, Bennett. You know exactly what you did. Her hands were shaking now, not with fear but with rage. My father showed me everything. Every private message, every personal photo, every intimate detail of my relationship with Cole. Your relationship with Cole, I repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. Is that what we're calling it now? It's none of your business what I call it. The mask was completely off now, revealing the entitled fury underneath. You had no right to violate my privacy, to steal my personal communications, to turn my own father against me. I walked to the workbench and leaned against it, studying her with the kind of clinical detachment I might use to examine a broken appliance. Your privacy, your personal communications, your relationship with Cole. I notice a pattern in your language, Lydia. Everything belongs to you, your career, your success, your secret affair. What exactly belongs to us anymore? Our marriage belongs to us. But even as she said it, the words sounded hollow. What we had together, what we built over 23 years, that should have meant something to you before you decided to destroy it out of spite. I destroyed it? I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Lydia, I didn't take those photos. I didn't send those messages. I didn't choose to have an affair with a colleague young enough to be our son. I simply showed your father what kind of woman his daughter had become. Those messages were private. Those photos were never meant for anyone else to see. Then perhaps you shouldn't have taken them. I pushed off from the workbench and walked toward her, watching as she instinctively stepped back. Perhaps you shouldn't have documented your betrayal in such exquisite detail. Perhaps you shouldn't have created an archive of evidence that could destroy not just our marriage, but your career and your reputation. You're not the man I married, she whispered, and for the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. No, I agreed. The man you married was naive enough to trust you completely, stupid enough to believe that your late nights were about work and your distant behavior was about stress, blind enough to miss the signs that his wife had checked out of their marriage months ago. I never stopped loving you? Stop. The word came out harder than I'd intended, cutting through her attempted manipulation like a blade. Don't insult what intelligence I have left by pretending this was about love. This was about excitement. About feeling powerful and desired and young again. About having your cake and eating it too. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to silence her. Your father cut you out of his will today, completely. The trust fund, the inheritance, the safety net you've counted on your entire life, gone. He's leaving everything to Mara, with me as executor until she turns 30. The color drained from her face as the full implications hit her. He can't do that. I'm his daughter. I have rights. You had privileges, I corrected. Privileges that came with expectations about how a Hartwell behaves, about honor and integrity and family loyalty. You violated those expectations, and now you're facing the consequences. This is insane, her voice rose to a near shriek. You're destroying our family over a few text messages and some photos. Cole means nothing to me. It was just physical, just a temporary thing that got out of hand. A few text messages, I repeated. 11 months of documented adultery is a few text messages. Explicit photos sent during our anniversary dinner is just physical. Meeting him in hotel rooms while I thought you were working late is temporary. Each fact hit her like a physical blow, and I could see her scrambling to find some angle, some way to minimize the damage or shift the blame back to me. I'll end it, she said desperately. I'll cut all contact with Cole, transfer to a different department, do whatever it takes to fix this. We can go to counseling, take a vacation, start over. Start over. I shook my head slowly. Lydia, you can't start over from betrayal. You can't rebuild trust on a foundation of lies. And you certainly can't undo the fact that your own father now sees you clearly for the first time in his life. Then what do you want from me? The question came out as a broken whisper. What will it take for you to forgive me? I looked at her standing there in our garage, surrounded by the tools and equipment of our suburban life, and felt something that might have been pity if it weren't mixed with so much contempt. "I want you to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. "I want you to realize that the world doesn't revolve around your desires and your career and your need for excitement. I want you to face the fact that you threw away 23 years of marriage for a few months of cheap thrills with a man who will abandon you the moment his own reputation is threatened. Cole won't abandon me. Cole is a junior associate at your law firm who just discovered that sleeping with a senior partner has consequences beyond the bedroom. How long do you think it will take him to distance himself from this scandal once it becomes public knowledge?" Her phone buzzed in her purse, and she grabbed it with desperate hope. I watched her face fall as she read whatever message had just arrived. "Let me guess," I said. "Cole thinks you two should take a break until things calm down. Maybe step back from the physical aspect of your relationship. Focus on being professional colleagues again." She didn't answer, but the way her shoulders sagged told me everything I needed to know. "He's protecting his career," I continued, "just like you would do if the situation were reversed. The difference is, you have more to lose than he does. You're the senior partner. You're the one who violated the firm's ethics policies. You're the one whose reputation will be destroyed when this becomes office gossip." "It won't become office gossip if you keep your mouth shut," she said, but there was no conviction behind the threat. "I don't need to say a word. Your father has friends throughout the legal community. Richard Pemberton has been handling high-profile divorces for 3 decades. These things have a way of spreading through professional networks like wildfire." I walked past her toward the door that led into the house, pausing just long enough to deliver the final blow. "Pack a bag, Lydia. Stay at your sister's place for a few days while you figure out what comes next. But understand this: our marriage is over. The only question now is whether you want to end it with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you want to drag it through a public divorce that will destroy what remains of your reputation." Behind me, I heard her sink onto the concrete floor of the garage, finally understanding that the life she'd built on lies and entitlement had just collapsed around her. But I didn't look back. I'd spent too many years watching her manipulate situations to her advantage, too many nights lying awake while she texted her lover, too many days pretending everything was fine while she systematically destroyed our marriage. The avalanche had begun, and Lydia was about to discover just how cold and merciless the landscape looked when the snow finally settled. 3 days passed before Lydia returned to collect more of her belongings. I watched from the living room window as she sat in her BMW in our driveway, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing with the kind of animated frustration that suggested the conversation wasn't going well. When she finally emerged from the car, her usual polished appearance showed signs of strain: wrinkled blouse, hair that hadn't seen a professional stylist recently, makeup that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion around her eyes. She let herself in with her key, moving through the house with the careful steps of someone navigating hostile territory. I remained in my chair, bourbon in hand, watching her pack boxes with belongings that had once represented our shared life. "The firm put me on administrative leave," she announced without preamble, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone still processing their own downfall. "Pending an internal investigation into violations of professional conduct policies." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, though we both knew my sympathy was purely theoretical. "Are you?" She stopped packing and turned to face me, her expression a mixture of anger and desperation. "Because this is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? My career destroyed, my reputation in ruins, my family turned against me. What I wanted was a faithful wife. What I got was a comprehensive lesson in betrayal and gaslighting." I took a sip of bourbon and studied her with clinical detachment. "Your career destroyed itself the moment you decided to document your affair in explicit detail. Your reputation ruined itself when you chose excitement over integrity. Your family turned against you when they saw evidence of who you'd become. She resumed packing with sharp, angry movements, throwing items into boxes with less care than they deserved. Cole says the firm is just covering themselves legally. Once the investigation is complete and they realize there's no actual misconduct. Cole is still talking to you? I interrupted, genuinely surprised. That's interesting. I would have expected him to be more concerned about protecting his own position. He loves me, she said, but the words sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. What we have is real, Bennett. It's not just some cheap affair like you keep claiming. Then why are you packing boxes in our house instead of moving in with him? The question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Lydia's hands stilled on the sweater she'd been folding, and for a moment, her mask slipped enough for me to see the fear underneath. His lease doesn't allow for additional occupants, she said finally. How convenient, and I suppose his salary as a junior associate wouldn't stretch to cover a larger apartment that might accommodate his great love. Money isn't everything, Bennett. Unlike some people, Cole and I understand that relationships are built on more than financial security. I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Lydia, your entire life has been built on financial security. Your father's money, my steady income, the trust fund that was supposed to guarantee your comfortable future. Now that those safety nets are gone, let's see how long your great love survives on a junior associate's salary and the promise of a career that may never recover from this scandal. You don't know anything about love, she snapped. You never did. 23 years of marriage and you never once made me feel the way Cole does. Never made me feel alive and desired and young? I finished for her. Is that what this is about, Lydia? Fear of aging? Fear of becoming invisible? Fear that your best years are behind you? Stop psychoanalyzing me. I'm not psychoanalyzing you. I'm observing you. The same way I observed the changes in your behavior over the past year. The same way I observed the pattern of lies and manipulation you used to cover your tracks. The same way I'm now observing how quickly your great love has left you to face the consequences alone. She slammed a book into the box with enough force to damage the spine. Cole isn't leaving me alone. He's being cautious because his career matters more than your relationship, which tells you everything you need to know about the depth of his feelings. My phone buzzed with a text from Jazz. Heard through the grapevine that your wife's situation at the firm is getting worse. Want to discuss over coffee? I showed Lydia the message, watching her face pale as she processed the implications. The grapevine? Jazz still has friends in the legal community from his police days. Apparently, your administrative leave has become a topic of conversation among people who matter. I set down my bourbon and leaned forward slightly. How long do you think it will take before the details of your investigation become public knowledge? How long before potential clients start asking whether they want to be represented by a firm that employs attorneys who violate professional ethics? They can't fire me based on rumors and speculation. They can fire you based on documented evidence of an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. They can fire you based on the potential liability you represent to their reputation and their client relationships. They can fire you because keeping you employed has become more expensive than letting you go. She resumed packing with mechanical precision, but I could see her hands trembling slightly as the full weight of her situation began to settle in. Mara called me yesterday, she said, without looking up from the box she was filling. She wants to meet for lunch next week to discuss what's happening with the family. That's good. You should maintain your relationship with your daughter. She sounded different on the phone, distant, like she was talking to a stranger instead of her mother. I felt a pang of genuine sympathy for the first time since this whole situation began. Whatever Lydia had done to our marriage, Mara was an innocent victim of her mother's choices. What did you tell her? that her father had misunderstood some private communications and overreacted in a way that was damaging to the family. Lydia's voice carried the smooth confidence of someone who'd convinced herself that her version of events was truth. That we were working through some marital difficulties, but that none of this was her fault or her responsibility. You told our daughter that I misunderstood your affair and overreacted by showing the evidence to your father. I told her that private matters between adults had been taken out of context and blown out of proportion. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd raised our daughter and built what I'd thought was a solid marriage. Lydia, do you honestly believe that? Do you really think 11 months of explicit messages and photos can be taken out of context? Do you actually believe that documenting your betrayal in such comprehensive detail was just a private matter between adults? I believe that marriages are complicated, and that sometimes people make mistakes that don't define who they are as human beings. Mistakes, I repeated slowly. 11 months of calculated deception was a mistake. Creating a digital archive of your adultery was a mistake. Gaslighting me when I noticed changes in your behavior was a mistake. Stop throwing those words around like weapons. Her composure finally cracked, revealing the desperation underneath. I'm not some monster, Bennett. I'm a woman who felt trapped in a marriage that had become routine and predictable. A woman who found someone who made her feel special and alive again. A woman who made some poor choices but never stopped caring about her family. You felt trapped, I said, turning back to face her. In a marriage that provided you with financial security, social status, and complete freedom to pursue your career ambitions. You felt trapped by a husband who never questioned your late nights, never demanded explanations for your changed behavior, never interfered with your professional relationships. You never questioned anything because you never paid attention to anything. The words exploded out of her with years of accumulated resentment. You were content to live your small, predictable life while I was building something significant. You were happy to coast along on routine while I was growing and changing and becoming more than just someone's wife. So you decided to become someone else's mistress instead. The words hit her like a physical slap, and for a moment she looked genuinely stricken. But the vulnerability passed quickly, replaced by the cold anger of someone who'd been cornered. I'm done with this conversation, she said, sealing the last box with more tape than necessary. I'm done with your cruelty and your self-righteousness and your need to punish me for wanting more than the life you were satisfied with. What you wanted was everything, I replied. The security of marriage and the excitement of an affair, the respectability of being Winston Hartwell's daughter and the thrill of being Reddick's secret lover, the financial safety of a trust fund and the emotional satisfaction of forbidden romance. You wanted it all, Lydia, and you were willing to lie and manipulate and betray to get it. She picked up the heaviest box and struggled toward the door, her pride preventing her from asking for help, even though she clearly needed it. The divorce papers will be filed next week, she said without turning around. I suggest you get yourself a good attorney because I intend to fight for everything I'm entitled to. Everything you're entitled to, I repeated. That should be an interesting legal argument. The faithless wife who documented her own adultery, lost her father's inheritance, and destroyed her own career is entitled to half of the assets accumulated during a marriage she systematically betrayed. She paused in the doorway, shoulders rigid with suppressed fury. I gave you the best years of my life, Bennett. I gave you my youth, my loyalty, your loyalty. The laugh that escaped me was harsh enough to make her flinch. Lydia, you gave me 22 years of loyalty and 11 months of comprehensive betrayal. The question is whether the betrayal invalidates everything that came before, or whether the loyalty makes the betrayal even more devastating. She left without another word, struggling with boxes that contained the remnants of a life she'd destroyed through her own choices. I watched from the window as she loaded her BMW with the pieces of our shared history, each item a reminder of what we'd built together and what she'd chosen to throw away. My phone rang as her taillights disappeared around the corner. "How are you holding up?" Jazz's voice carried the gruff concern of someone who'd seen enough domestic disasters to recognize the warning signs of a man on the edge. "I'm discovering that revenge is more exhausting than I expected," I admitted. "Every victory feels hollow when you realize what you had to lose to achieve it." Second thoughts? I considered the question seriously, weighing the satisfaction of seeing Lydia face consequences against the genuine grief I felt for the marriage we'd lost. "No," I said finally. "No second thoughts. She made her choices, and now she gets to live with the results. The only thing I regret is not seeing who she really was before I wasted 23 years trying to build a life with someone who was always looking for something better." What's next? I looked around the house that had once felt like a home and now felt like a mausoleum of broken promises and shattered trust. Next, I find out whether Cole Reddick is as committed to their great love as Lydia believes he is. And then I discover just how much damage a man can do when he stops caring about being the bigger person. The war was far from over, but the battle lines had been drawn. Lydia had chosen her side when she decided that her marriage vows were negotiable and her family's trust was expendable. Now she was about to learn that some consequences can't be managed or manipulated away, and some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The ruin was spreading, and I was no longer interested in trying to contain the damage. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports that suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the domestic warfare consuming my life. Mara's name appeared on my phone screen, and I answered with the mixture of hope and dread that had become my default emotional state. "Dad, we need to talk." Her voice carried a tension I'd never heard before, the sound of someone who'd been forced to grow up faster than they'd planned. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "Mom told me her version of what's happening. Now I want to hear yours." I set down the reports and walked to the window of my office, looking out at a city that seemed to be moving forward while my own life remained frozen in the aftermath of betrayal. "Your mother and I are getting divorced," I said simply. "The reasons are complicated, but the outcome is clear. Our marriage is over." "She says you invaded her privacy and turned Grandpa against her out of spite. She says you're trying to destroy her career because you can't handle her success." The words stung because they represented everything I'd feared. That Lydia would poison our daughter against me, that she'd twist the narrative to make herself the victim of my jealousy and vindictiveness. "Mara, I'm going to tell you something that your mother probably won't appreciate, but that you deserve to know as an adult." I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change our relationship forever. "Your mother has been having an affair with a colleague for almost a year. I discovered evidence of this relationship and shared it with your grandfather. He responded by removing her from his will. Her career problems are a consequence of her own choices, not my vindictiveness." The silence that followed was so complete, I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Mara finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "An affair? Mom is having an affair?" "Was having an affair. I believe it's over now, though that's more due to practical considerations than moral awakening." "How do you know? How can you be sure?" I closed my eyes and made another decision that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Because I have photographs and text messages that document their relationship in explicit detail. Because I have 11 months of evidence that proves your mother was living a double life while pretending to be a faithful wife. Jesus, Dad. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry you had to learn about this, sweetheart. I'm sorry your mother put us all in a position where these conversations became necessary. Can I see the evidence? The request hit me like a physical blow. "Mara, I don't think that's... I'm 22 years old, Dad. I'm not a child who needs to be protected from adult realities. If you're asking me to choose sides in this divorce, I need to know what I'm choosing between. I understood her logic, but the thought of showing our daughter the explicit evidence of her mother's betrayal made me feel sick to my stomach. The evidence exists, I said finally. If you absolutely need to see it to make informed decisions about your relationship with both of us, then I'll share it with you. But I hope you'll trust me when I say that some images can't be unseen, and some knowledge changes how you view people forever. I need to think about this, she said after a long pause. I need to process what you've told me and figure out how I feel about everything. Take all the time you need. Whatever happens between your mother and me, you're still our daughter, and we both love you more than anything else in this world. Do you still love her? Mom, I mean. After everything she's done, do you still love her? The question pierced through all my anger and resentment, reaching the raw wound that lay beneath the surface of my calculated revenge. I love the woman I thought she was, I said honestly. I love the memories of who we used to be together, but the person she's become, the choices she's made, the lies she's told, I don't know if that person is capable of love in any meaningful sense. After we hung up, I sat in my office staring at reports I couldn't focus on, trying to process the conversation and its implications. Mara was an adult, capable of making her own decisions about her relationships with both parents, but she was also our daughter, caught in the crossfire of a war she'd never asked to be part of. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Ashford, this is Cole Reddick. I think we should meet to discuss our mutual situation. There are things you should know about Lydia that might surprise you. I stared at the message for several minutes, trying to decode the motivation behind Cole's sudden desire for communication. Was this an attempt at damage control? A plea for mercy? Or something more calculated? I typed back, interesting timing. What kind of things? His response came quickly. The kind that might change how you view this entire situation. Can you meet me tonight? Neutral location, just the two of us. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, far enough from both our usual haunts to avoid unwanted attention. As I drove through the city streets, I tried to imagine what Cole Reddick could possibly tell me that would change my perspective on my wife's betrayal. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few college students with laptops and an elderly couple sharing a newspaper. Cole sat in a corner booth, looking younger than his 38 years and significantly less confident than I'd expected. When he saw me, he stood up with the nervous energy of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you'd agree to meet with me. I slid into the booth across from him, studying his face for signs of deception or manipulation. You said there were things I should know about Lydia. I'm curious what insights the other man might have about my wife. He winced at the phrase other man, which told me something about how he viewed his role in this situation. That's part of what I wanted to discuss, he said, wrapping his hands around a coffee cup that looked like it had been sitting untouched for a while. I don't think I was the other man, Mr. Ashford. I think I was just the most recent one. The statement hit me like a punch to the solar plexus, and I felt the careful control I'd maintained for weeks begin to slip. Explain. Cole pulled out his phone and opened what appeared to be a messaging app. Lydia was always very careful about covering her tracks with you, but she was less careful about her digital footprint in other areas. She had profiles on several dating apps, accounts that were active throughout our relationship. He slid the phone across the table, and I found myself looking at screenshots of conversations between my wife and various men, timestamps that overlapped with the period of her affair with Cole. She told me you two had an arrangement, Cole continued as I scrolled through evidence of betrayals I'd never imagined. That you'd agreed to an open marriage but preferred not to talk about the details. She said you were both sophisticated enough to understand that marriage didn't have to mean exclusive intimacy. I looked up from the phone, meeting his eyes directly. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it, he admitted. It made what we were doing feel less like betrayal and more like modern relationship dynamics. How many others were there? Based on what I found when I started looking, at least 6 that I can identify over the past 2 years. Probably more if you go back further. I handed him back his phone, my hands steadier than I felt. Why are you telling me this? Because when the firm started their investigation, I realized I wasn't just facing professional consequences for an affair with a senior partner. I was facing potential criminal charges for harassment and stalking. Criminal charges? Cole's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Lydia told HR that I'd pursued her aggressively despite her repeated rejections. That I'd used my position as a junior associate to pressure her into a relationship she didn't want. That the explicit photos and messages were evidence of my inappropriate behavior, not mutual participation in an affair. The audacity of it took my breath away. Even facing the consequences of her own choices, Lydia was still manipulating the narrative to protect herself at someone else's expense. She's claiming you harassed her into a relationship. She's claiming I pressured her into intimate behavior using workplace leverage and threats to her reputation. She's presenting herself as the victim, saying a manipulative subordinate abused his role to force unwanted attention on a vulnerable superior. I laughed, a sound devoid of humor. A vulnerable superior. That's rich. The dating app evidence proves she was actively seeking multiple relationships throughout the period she claims I was harassing her. Her messages to other men show a pattern of deception about her marital status and availability. She told most of them she was divorced or separated. What do you want from me, Cole? He leaned forward, desperation clear in his eyes. I want you to know the truth about who you were married to. I want you to understand that what happened between us wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a middle-aged woman's attempt to recapture her youth. It was part of a pattern of deception and manipulation that goes back years. And in exchange for this revelation, I'm hoping you'll consider that I'm as much a victim of Lydia's lies as you are. That maybe we both got played by someone who's very good at telling people what they want to hear. I studied his face, trying to separate genuine remorse from self-serving manipulation. You're facing criminal charges and professional ruin because you believed my wife when she told you our marriage was open. Now, you want me to feel sorry for you. I want you to understand that the woman who betrayed you betrayed me too. She used both of us to get what she wanted, and now she's throwing me under the bus to save herself. What she wanted, I repeated. What exactly did she want, Cole? Excitement, validation, the thrill of juggling multiple relationships without any of the emotional or financial consequences. She wanted to feel powerful and desired and in control of everyone around her. I stood up from the booth, processing everything he'd told me and trying to fit it into the larger picture of my marriage's destruction. Thank you for the information, I said finally. It doesn't change what happened between us, but it does clarify who I was really married to all these years. What are you going to do with what I've told you? I looked down at him, this young man who'd thought he was sophisticated enough to navigate an open marriage and instead found himself caught in the web of a master manipulator. I'm going to make sure Lydia faces the full consequences of her choices. All of them. From all the men she's deceived and all the lies she's told. I pulled out my wallet and left money for both our coffees. And you're going to provide me with copies of everything you found, every dating profile, every conversation, every piece of evidence that shows the scope of her deception. Why would I do that? Because right now, you're facing criminal charges for something that was actually mutual participation in a pattern of behavior she's engaged in with multiple men. Because the evidence you've gathered proves she's committed perjury in her statements to HR. Because helping me expose the full truth about Lydia's behavior is probably your only chance of avoiding prison time for harassment you didn't commit. Cole nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're going to destroy her completely, aren't you? I'm going to make sure she faces the consequences of every lie she's told and every person she's manipulated. If that destroys her, it's because she built her life on a foundation of deception that was always going to collapse eventually. I walked out of the coffee shop with a new understanding of the woman I'd been married to for 23 years. Lydia hadn't just betrayed our marriage, she'd been systematically deceiving everyone in her life while presenting herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. The storm was about to get much worse, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I had the weapons necessary to fight back against someone who'd made manipulation into an art form. But first, I had a phone call to make to my daughter, because Mara deserved to know that her mother's betrayal went far deeper than a simple affair with a colleague. The truth, as it turned out, was much more devastating than I'd ever imagined. The evidence Cole provided painted a picture of systematic deception that went far beyond anything I'd imagined during our marriage. Dating profiles spanning 3 years, conversations with dozens of men, explicit photos shared with virtual strangers while she played the role of devoted wife at home. I spent 2 days organizing the material, creating a comprehensive timeline that showed the true scope of Lydia's double life. When I called Mara to arrange another meeting, my voice carried a weariness that seemed to age me with every word. "There's more, isn't there?" she asked, before I could explain why I needed to see her. "Much more, and you deserve to know all of it before you make any decisions about your relationship with your mother." We met at a quiet restaurant across town, far from anywhere we might encounter Lydia or her remaining friends. Mara looked older than her 22 years, as if the stress of our family's implosion had forced her to mature faster than nature intended. I slid a tablet across the table containing screenshots and evidence I'd organized into a presentation that told the complete story of her mother's betrayal. "This is everything. The affair with Cole was just the tip of the iceberg." Mara scrolled through the evidence with the focused intensity of someone trying to process information that challenged everything they'd believed about their family. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, disgust, anger, and finally a kind of cold understanding that reminded me uncomfortably of her grandfather. "How long?" she asked without looking up from the screen. "At least 3 years that I can document, probably longer." "And you never suspected?" "I suspected something was wrong, but I never imagined the scope of it. I thought she was having an affair, not running a parallel life with multiple men, while lying to everyone about her marriage status." Mara set down the tablet and looked at me directly for the first time since we'd sat down. "What are you going to do with this information?" "I'm going to make sure everyone who needs to know the truth has access to it. The law firm investigating Cole's harassment charges, the divorce court handling our proceedings, your grandfather, who should understand exactly why he was right to cut her out of his will. And me? What am I supposed to do with this?" I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling the weight of a father's responsibility to protect his daughter from painful truths while also preparing her for the realities of adult life. "You're supposed to make informed decisions about what kind of relationship you want to have with both your parents going forward. You're supposed to understand that people aren't always who they appear to be, even people who are supposed to love and protect you. And you're supposed to know that none of this is your fault or your responsibility to fix." "I feel like I don't know her at all," Mara said quietly. "The woman in these messages, the person who could lie so easily to so many people, that's not the mother who raised me. Maybe it is, and we just never saw that side of her because we weren't obstacles to what she wanted. Maybe the loving mother and devoted wife were just roles she played when they served her purposes. That's a terrible thing to say about someone." "It's a terrible thing to discover about someone," I corrected. "But pretending it's not true doesn't make it any less real." My phone buzzed with a call from Jazz. I answered it on speaker, knowing that Mara needed to hear whatever update he had about the situation. "Bennett, You need to know that Lydia's been making the rounds, trying to drum up support for her version of events. She's telling people you're having a breakdown, that you've become obsessed with destroying her career out of jealousy. What kind of people? Mutual friends, neighbors, colleagues at your company. She's painting herself as the victim of an unstable husband who can't handle his wife's professional success. I looked at Mara, who was listening to this conversation with the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. Jazz, I'm here with Mara. Can you tell her what you told me about the law firm's investigation? The harassment charges against Cole have been dropped, Jazz said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd seen justice served. The evidence he provided about Lydia's dating activities proved that their relationship was consensual and part of a broader pattern of deceptive behavior on her part. What does that mean for Mom? Mara asked. It means she's facing potential perjury charges for lying to investigators. It means the law firm is considering a lawsuit for damages to their reputation. And it means her legal career is effectively over, regardless of any criminal proceedings. After Jazz hung up, Mara and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications of everything we'd learned. I need to see her, Mara said finally. I need to hear her explanation for all of this. Are you sure that's wise? She's going to try to manipulate you, to make you feel sorry for her and angry at me. I know. But I need to look her in the eye and ask her directly about these lies. I need to give her a chance to tell me the truth, even if I don't expect her to take it. I understood her need for closure, even if I feared the conversation would only cause her more pain. Do you want me to be there? No, this is something I need to do alone. That evening, while Mara was confronting her mother with the evidence of her systematic deception, I received an unexpected visitor. Winston Hartwell stood on my doorstep looking every one of his 74 years, the weight of his daughter's betrayal having aged him visibly in the weeks since our kitchen table conversation. May I come in, Bennett? There are things we need to discuss. I led him to the living room, pouring bourbon for both of us without asking if he wanted it. Some conversations required liquid courage, and this promised to be one of them. Mara called me this afternoon, Winston said, settling into the chair Lydia used to occupy. She told me about the additional evidence you've uncovered, about the scope of Lydia's deception. I'm sorry you had to learn about it. I know this can't be easy for you. Lydia is my daughter, and I love her despite everything she's done. But love doesn't require blindness to someone's faults, and it certainly doesn't require enabling their destructive behavior. He took a sip of bourbon and stared out the window at the neighborhood where his daughter had lived what appeared to be a normal suburban life while conducting multiple affairs with men who thought she was divorced. I've been thinking about patterns, Winston continued, about signs I might have missed over the years, about whether this behavior started recently or whether it's always been part of who she is. What did you conclude? I concluded that I raised a daughter who believed she was entitled to whatever she wanted, regardless of the cost to other people. I gave her every advantage, every opportunity, every safety net she could ever need, and somehow that created someone who thought rules didn't apply to her. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? He turned to look at me directly, his eyes carrying the weight of paternal guilt. The signs were there, Bennett. The way she manipulated situations to her advantage in high school, the way she discarded friends who were no longer useful to her in college, the way she seemed to view relationships as transactions rather than emotional connections. I thought about my own blindness to Lydia's true nature, about the signs I'd missed or rationalized away over 23 years of marriage. We see what we want to see, I said finally, especially when it comes to people we love. Yes, but there's a difference between optimistic interpretation and willful blindness. I chose not to see who my daughter really was, because acknowledging it would have required me to take responsibility for my role in creating her. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. Mara's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. Dad? Her voice was thick with tears, and I could hear traffic in the background as if she was driving. "Can you come pick me up? I don't think I should be driving right now." "Where are you, sweetheart?" "Parking lot outside Mom's hotel." The conversation didn't go well. I looked at Winston, who was already standing up and reaching for his coat. "We'll both be there in 15 minutes, I told her. The hotel was one of those extended stay places that catered to business travelers and people in transition. Mara sat in her car in the parking lot, staring at the building with the expression of someone who'd just learned that everything they'd believed about their family was a lie. Winston and I flanked her as she recounted the conversation with her mother, each detail more devastating than the last. "She denied everything at first," Mara said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Even when I showed her the evidence, she claimed it was fake, that you'd somehow manufactured it to frame her. But eventually she admitted the truth. Eventually she got angry and said things that I'll never be able to forget." Mara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "She said she'd been trapped in a marriage to a man who never understood her ambitions. She said she deserved to feel alive, desired and free to explore intimacy without judgment from people who were too conventional to understand modern relationships." Winston made a sound that might have been a growl. "She said the men she met online gave her things you never could, Dad. Excitement and passion and intellectual stimulation. She said she'd tried to be a good wife and mother, but that she wasn't going to sacrifice her happiness for other people's narrow-minded expectations." "What did you say to that?" I asked her about the lies, about telling these men she was divorced, about creating fake profiles, about deceiving everyone in her life while presenting herself as a victim of other people's behavior. Mara's voice grew stronger as she continued. "And she said that sometimes you have to lie to protect yourself from people who wouldn't understand the truth." I felt a surge of pride for my daughter's moral clarity, even as my heart broke for the pain this conversation must have caused her. "She tried to make me choose sides," Mara continued. "She said I could either support her through this difficult time or align myself with the people who were trying to destroy her out of spite and jealousy." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that I couldn't support someone who'd built their entire life on lies and manipulation. I told her that I loved the mother I thought I knew, but that I couldn't have a relationship with the person she'd revealed herself to be." Winston reached over and squeezed his granddaughter's shoulder with the gentle strength of someone who understood the weight of family disappointment. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "It takes courage to choose truth over comfort, especially when it comes to family." As we sat in that hotel parking lot, 3 generations of a family torn apart by one person's selfishness, I realized that the revenge I'd sought had transformed into something larger and more significant. It had become about justice, about consequences, about refusing to enable destructive behavior even when it came from someone we loved. Lydia had made her choices, and now she was facing the full weight of their consequences. Her career was over. Her inheritance was gone. Her family had turned away from her, and the men she'd deceived had provided evidence that would likely result in criminal charges. But more than that, she was alone. Truly alone, for perhaps the first time in her life, without the safety nets and support systems she'd always taken for granted. As we drove away from that hotel, leaving Lydia to face the ashes of the life she'd built on lies and betrayal, I felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't regret either. Justice, I realized, didn't always feel good. But it was necessary, especially when the alternative was allowing destructive behavior to continue unchecked. The storm had passed, leaving devastation in its wake. But sometimes, destruction was the only way to clear the ground for something better to grow. Lydia would have to live with the consequences of her choices, just as the rest of us would have to learn to build new lives from the wreckage of the old ones. The difference was, we would be building on a foundation of truth, while she remained trapped in the web of lies she'd spent years creating. In the end, that made all the difference.